Our next speaker is going to be talking about scientists and science policy, shrinking the gap. Take it away, Demitri.
All right, so my name is Demitri. Today I'm going to be talking about just science and science policy. I was one of the AIP, John Mather policy interns this summer, and so I got a lot of experience with doing policy work and with being a scientist coming into that kind of realm. And I'm going to be talking about some of the things that cause the gap between us and how to shrink that gap a little bit here. And I worked with the House Minority Science, Space and Technology Committee, and Rebecca Esmondani was my mentor during this whole process here. I want to begin with a little bit of what led me to this internship. I started my undergraduate career and had my whole undergraduate career at Sonoma State University, and it was physics major from the get-go. And so since then, I was always just wanting to do science. It wasn't until my junior year I ended up actually getting really involved with my local club and being the vice president of my SPS chapter there. And that actually led me directly to ending up on the National Council for Society of Physics Students, where I got the opportunity to be a voting member of the National Council and work on a lot of policy work on an organizational level. But that kind of got me really interested in what's it like doing it on a government level or a nationwide level. And so that led me to applying for this internship and working in policy a little bit to kind of get my feet wet in there. And sort of some of the things I did while I was in this internship, which were incredibly different than any of the research, anything I've done before, but incredibly refreshing at the same time, doing something new. I got to do a lot of hearing material. I got to prepare the questions and the witness testimonies and biographies for all these hearings that were happening within our committee. And I got to take some really cool pictures. This one here is Captain Scott Kelly, the man who spent a year in space. He was testifying during one of our hearings on astronaut healthcare. And as much as people don't generally look at the intern with the camera, I got lucky enough to get a great shot of him here. So I did a lot of other stuff too. I was able to go to different briefings from several groups that were giving them. I got to go to hearings from other committees and got to write up reports for our staff. And I even got to sit in on a really incredible meeting with the National Weather Service and with the director of the National Weather Service, and something like that I had not expected going into an internship. And so I got a really different perspective on what it was like being a scientist and being in policy work at the same time. And so that kind of led me to what I'm going to be talking about. But in the meantime, I almost single-handedly took down a forest. I never knew how much paper you have to print for hearings, how much work and how much actual paperwork is required when you're going into anything. We do recycle, of course, but just the feeling of it as you're carrying all these binders full is incredible. And so I'll jump right into kind of what I have learned and what my view is as of now. Some of the things that cause this disparity is there is a language barrier. It's well known that there's a language barrier between the public realm and scientists, and a lot of work's being done in there, but there's a different language barrier between policymakers and scientists. And that is a huge kind of problem that needs to be addressed and understood so that more effective communication can happen. Beyond that, there are very few scientists actually in Congress. I'll highlight that later on in this talk as well. And science is huge. With the few people that work on it, there's a lot of stuff they need to understand and understand the implications and ins and outs of many different fields and subfields of science, and they need help doing that effectively. So the language barrier, I'll start. There's many more terms that have issues, but these are some of the ones I've found through my experience talking with policymakers, listening in on hearings, and asking some of the staff, what they understood with these terms and things is, if you have a term like a theory, it's in the policy world, it's more like an idea. It isn't necessarily backed by facts. It's kind of your attempt at explaining something. It could be right, it could be wrong, it's not proved. But in the science realm, a theory is something that explains a natural phenomena and it's highly proved. We don't have something that has proved it wrong, which is why it's called a theory, but that does not mean that it is potentially incorrect. I mean, there are many theories we have that have been proven many, many times over. Beyond that, there's uncertainty. And as much as the terms might sound similar in both, where it's something doubtful or unknown in the policy realm, and in the science realm, it's a situation which involves some imperfect information. The difference comes from how the term is used. In science, it's often used to kind of explain how confident you are in your work. You talk about uncertainty to say that I am very confident in my data and my results and my conclusions. But in the policy realm, uncertainty, and in the public realm, uncertainty means the exact opposite. The definition is the same, but the use of it is for talking about, having something unknown or questionable or doubtful. And so that's something that can be addressed, and different terms can be used in these situations to address those problems. The last one, a law. A law for policy it's a rule or restriction society is to follow. It's the end goal. And they start all the policy work and they want to end up with the law. In science, it's often not the case. A law is simply a description of something we see in the natural world. And it is proven to be true many times over, but it doesn't explain why. That's the job of the theory, is to explain why. And so the law is oftentimes kind of a stepping stone. You find the law by, maybe if you have the gas laws, for example, we know what reactions will take place. We know if we squeeze it, what will happen to the temperature or the volume or the pressure, but that doesn't explain why, and that's kind of where you would start your experiment. So you say, I know that this happens, and I want to figure out more of why it happens. But in policy, that is the end goal, the end line, is to create a law. So that is a fundamental kind of different view on these words. And so understanding the two different views will help scientists and policymakers interact and communicate in more effective manners. Moving on to the scientists in Congress, there's only 4 scientists in Congress. There's 535 members of Congress. That is less than 1%. And beyond that, only 2 of these scientists actually have a degree higher than a bachelor's in science. There's 1 mathematician and 1 physicist. The 2 bachelors are a chemist and a microbiologist. That is less than 1% of Congress that would actually have this technical knowledge or technical vocabulary that scientists would have. There are 8 engineers. That is a little bit better, but still, even if you add the 2 of them together, you get 2.25% of Congress. Still very few people have this technical background in the language. And that's why you need to understand the differences, because the vast majority of policymakers and congresspeople will not have that same language, terminology that you'll be using with them. Physicians have a rather decent representation, 18 of them. Lawyers, they're about 40%. There's 213 lawyers. Not to say that lawyers aren't necessary, but there is room for scientists to grow in Congress. There's plenty of room. And then the rest are other liberal arts degrees, political science, things like that. There are several with no college degree as well. And so there's plenty of room for scientists to grow, and there's plenty of room for scientists to work with what's already existing in Congress. And beyond that, the Congress people, they have staff. There are also committees that have staff that work on these. So they're not the only ones that are going to be looking into these issues and all these topics and science and everything. I'm going to be talking about my own committee here, the group I got to work with, the science committee. With the majority side, there's about 3 to 5 people for each subcommittee. And the committee's broken up into these subcommittees to work on different topics. We have 3 people working on all of energy topics with the majority, and 2 of them working with the minority. So there's 5. They don't all work as one forward motion. They do work kind of roundabout and together at some points in different areas at others. So it's not like it's 5 people pushing directly spearhead, but it isn't quite 5 people against each other either. But my point with this is, with all of science in the science committee, we only have 29 members total between the two sides working for science policy. But science is an incredibly huge field. If you look at science, you can break it down into physical science and life science and things like that. But the problem is, that's not what it is. You get a PhD in a science, you have a very narrow expertise. You have a wide range of knowledge, but that doesn't cover all of physics or all of chemistry or all of anything. That's why there's so many different degrees out there. But the problem is, there's few people that are supposed to cover all of these different topics and make policies for all of these different fields. And without having the background in every specific one, they need to do a ton of research, and they need to understand all of the ins and outs and implications of the policies they might make, how it will hurt or help certain people and how to mitigate the problems and do the best they can for science. So just to kind of illustrate that, a simple look at the subfields of science. Physical sciences alone, it breaks down into 71 different subfields. And we only have 29 people working in the science committee full-time with each subcommittee, working for these goals, working for science progress as well. And so they're going to be expected to be experts in all of these as they're making the policy and developing the legislation that will be going through Congress. And so, when you break it down even further, there's just under 200 different subfields in just a cursory look into what science subfields are. And that is very many fields for these individual people to be working on and be expected to be experts in. So, what can we do to help them? As scientists, we need to understand the language barrier. We need to be able to speak with them. We need to have a dialogue with these policymakers, with these Congress people, so that we can give them the information they need to make the informed decisions that we would like. You can think of it as, you don't go to a restaurant and have a peanut allergy and not tell the waiter. You might get something with peanuts in it. That's bad. But if you tell them, you get what you need. We need to help policymakers. We need to give them the information they need so they can make decisions that actually help everybody. That's kind of the point of this, is science is something that needs to give the policymakers the tools so that they can create policy for them. I need to give them something so they can help me. I can't expect them to do it right without that information. And at the end, I'd like to just kind of point out the other parts of this internship. I got to do great things. I got to meet really interesting people. About 2 years ago, I got to see my local representative give a commencement speech at my university. I finally got to meet him here in Congress. And so that was really cool highlight. Even though I'm from California and it's a long way away, but I still got to meet my actual representative. But I'd like to leave you guys with the idea that there is that language barrier with public, and the public still needs to be educated. There's a lot of work being done in that, and that needs to continue. But there needs to be new work being done to educate policymakers on this language barrier and ourselves, and it needs to be done in a different way. There needs to be this different understanding of this language barrier to create this better education process for them. Scientists, they have a responsibility to maintain this dialogue. You have a responsibility to tell that waiter you have your peanut allergy. You have the responsibility as a scientist to have this dialogue and help give these policymakers the tools they need to help you. And then don't give up. Dr. Brown here was talking about scientist motivation. We have the motivation to keep pushing, always. Don't give up with policymakers, just like we don't give up with our science experiments. We just got to keep trying, and it will happen. We will eventually get a little better understanding. There are many cases where the government has helped hugely with science. A lot of our great works, Hubble and all of our space shuttle missions and everything, that was all government work. And I think that that's something that we can continue to have and kind of improve upon as we move forward. So I'd like to just have my acknowledgements here. Thank John Mather for sponsoring this internship, AIP and SPS for hosting this internship, and Jennifer Greenamore for helping me get into the committee that was perfect for me. It was fantastic. And Pamitha Weir Singh, he was with our environment subcommittee, huge help and really helped me kind of explore my interests and do some great work with this committee here. Thank you.
And we have time for about 2 quick questions. Yeah.
What language do you suggest we use instead of the theory, law, and what was the other one? Uncertainty.
Uncertainty. So I'm not necessarily suggesting you use a different language. I know many people have used other suggestions like using model for all of them. I think a more kind of use that language, but also back it up with your definition of it as well as you're giving it to these people, so that they have a better kind of understanding of what you're trying to give them. Not necessarily use more words. More words can mean more confusion as well. Yes?
You mentioned the engineers and physicians that are in Congress.
Right.
To what extent do you think those particular congressmen or congresswomen support science?
I think supporting science would be pretty strong with them, and supporting science is pretty strong with many congresspeople. But it's not so much supporting science, which is what I'm talking about. It's being able to help them understand what they're supporting when these legislation comes across their desk, that they can read this language and we can give them the language so that they know the actual implications of what's happening or what's being said, or what I'm saying I'm trying to do with my research if I'm putting something across them.
Last question?
So did the issue of climate change come up? Because I'm curious about the majority, which is a party that essentially, I think, doesn't accept that climate change is a thing. Do you have the joy of dealing with people on a science committee who don't believe in science?
Yes, it did. That issue did come up within our committee several times. It is a difficult issue to deal with, and there were a lot of things that kind of were interesting to see. There's stuff kind of in the press that you can find about this. I don't want to say one thing one way or the other if possible.
Real quick comment, then we have to move on.
Speak openly. Just tell him how you felt at the hearing. No, seriously, like, it's just me. I'm not going to tell him.
Okay, there was one hearing with McCarthy from the EPA, and that was regarding a lot of environmental issues in general. And it was at the time when a lot of the Democrats were doing a sit-in on the House floor, and so we had about 2 people that were able to make it for the hearing because it was at the same time. They had their entire committee show up and spend about 3 hours berating this poor woman, incessant calling, just basically attacking her science and her team as well. It does get frustrating, but it is not all of Congress, and I don't want to represent all of Congress as that way, or even all of the Republicans as that way, because not every single one is.
So, round of applause for Chris Button.